When most people imagine the Viking Age, they picture horned helmets, which they didn't actually wear, burning villages, and fierce warriors charging into battle. But that image is only a small fragment of reality. The truth is that the Viking Age was not defined by constant fighting, but by everyday survival in one of the most challenging environments in medieval Europe. For the majority of people living in Scandinavia between roughly 793 and 1066 AD, life was not about raids or glory. It was about farming, family, food, weather, and endurance. It was a world where nature had the final say, and where even the simplest tasks required effort, planning, and cooperation. The people we call Vikings today were not a single unified group or nation. They came from regions that are now Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, and they lived in small, scattered communities spread across rugged landscapes of mountains, forests, fjords, and icy coastlines. Most of them never went on raids or voyages abroad. In fact, the majority of Viking Age people lived their entire lives within a few miles of their birthplace. They were farmers, fishermen, craftsmen, traders, and families trying to make a living in a harsh climate where winters were long, summers were short, and survival depended on preparation. Their society was deeply connected to nature, and everything from food to travel was shaped by the environment around them. Farming was the most important part of Viking daily life, and almost every household depended on it. Families worked together on small plots of land, growing crops like barley, rye, and oats, which were used for bread, porridge, and brewing ale. However, farming in Scandinavia was not easy. The soil was often rocky and poor, and the growing season was short due to the cold climate. Because of this, Vikings had to work extremely hard during the warmer months to store enough food for the winter. Alongside crops, they raised animals such as cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs. These animals provided milk, cheese, meat, wool, and leather, making them essential to survival. Nothing was wasted, and every part of farm life had a purpose, from ploughing fields to repairing fences and preserving food for the cold months ahead. Viking homes, known as longhouses, were central to daily life and often served as the heart of both family and community. These buildings were long, narrow structures made from wood, stone, or turf, depending on what materials were available locally. Inside, there were usually no separate rooms. Instead, families, servants, and sometimes even animals shared the same large indoor space. At the center of the longhouse was a fire pit that provided heat, light, and a place to cook food. Smoke from the fire often filled the room because chimneys were not commonly used, which meant the air inside could be thick and difficult to breathe. Despite these conditions, the longhouse was a place of warmth and connection, especially during the long winter months. People gathered around the fire to eat, repair tools, weave cloth, tell stories, and plan for the days ahead. Food in the Viking Age was simple, seasonal, and heavily dependent on what could be preserved. Most meals were based on grains like barley and oats, often made into porridge or flatbread. Meat was eaten when available, but because animals were valuable for milk and wool, they were not slaughtered often unless necessary. Instead, Vikings relied on preserved foods such as dried fish, smoked meat, salted pork, and fermented dairy products. Vegetables and wild plants were also collected when in season, adding variety to their diet. Food preservation was essential, especially in winter when fresh resources were scarce. Drinking was also important in daily life. Water was not always safe, so people often drank ale or mead. Meals were shared within families, and eating together was a social activity that reinforced bonds and traditions. Every person in Viking society had responsibilities from a young age. Children learned skills early, helping with farming, animal care, or household chores, depending on their gender and family needs. Men typically handled heavy outdoor labour such as farming, construction, fishing, and sometimes long-distance travel or trading expeditions. Women played an equally important role in managing households, preparing food, making clothing, milking animals, and overseeing farm operations when men were away. In some cases, women even owned land or managed farms independently. Life was structured around cooperation, and survival depended on every member of the household contributing. There was little separation between work and home life. Everything was connected. Although most Vikings lived locally, many were also skilled sailors and traders. They built advanced ships that allowed them to travel across rivers, seas, and oceans with surprising speed and flexibility. These ships were used not only for raiding, but also for trade and exploration. Vikings traded goods such as furs, wool, iron, timber, and amber for silver, silk, spices, glass, and other luxury items from distant regions. Their trade routes stretched across Europe, the Middle East, and even parts of Asia. This connected Viking communities to a much larger world than their isolated farms might suggest. Travel was dangerous, but it also brought wealth, knowledge, and new cultural influences back home. Viking society was highly community-based, and decisions were often made collectively. Local assemblies called things were held where disputes were settled, laws were discussed, and important decisions were made. These gatherings were not controlled by kings alone, but involved free men of the community who had a voice in legal matters. Reputation and honor were extremely important in Viking culture. A person's word, bravery, and behavior could determine their social standing. Feuds between families sometimes lasted for years, but there were also systems in place to resolve conflicts through compensation or mediation. Social life was closely tied to storytelling, feasting, and gatherings, where people shared news, legends, and history. Before Christianity became widespread in Scandinavia, Vikings followed a belief system based on Norse mythology. They believed in powerful gods like Odin, Thor, and Freya, as well as giants, spirits, and fate that shaped the universe. These beliefs were deeply connected to everyday life, influencing how people understood storms, harvests, war, and death. Rituals and ceremonies were sometimes performed to seek protection, good fortune, or success in farming and travel. Storytelling was one of the most important cultural traditions, with sagas passed down orally for generations. These stories preserved history, explained the world, and entertained communities during long winter nights. The daily life of the Vikings was not only about war and conquest, but about resilience, adaptation, and survival in a demanding environment. Most people lived simple but structured lives, centered around farming, family, and community cooperation. They worked with what nature gave them, endured long winters, and made the most of short summers. Yet despite the hardships, Viking society was rich in culture, exploration, trade, and storytelling. It was a world where ordinary people performed extraordinary feats simply to survive, and in doing so, they built a legacy that continues to fascinate the modern world today.